Hey guys, Shalana here. Welcome to the Binge Zone. On today's video, we're going to be talking about season 3 of Stranger Things. And just when we thought Stranger Things could not get any better, this third season blows everything we were expecting out of the water. So there's a lot to unpack here. So in this video, we're going to be talking about the characters, the plot, the themes, the overarching story of the show, as well as the crazy ending that left all of our jaws dropped. So if you have not seen this season, I recommend you stop this video now, because from this moment forward, full spoilers ahead. Before we get into breaking down what happened this season, let's run back some of our characters. The show brings back some of our favorite characters as well as some new characters. For example, we have our 4 main characters, Will, Mike, Dustin, and Lucas coming back. We also have John, Nancy, Steve, 11, as well as Max, Billy, Joyce, and Hopper. We also have some new characters as well as characters from the last season who take a more prominent role. We have Erica, Lucas's sister, as well as Murray, the conspiracy theorist guy from last season that helped John and Nancy out. And we have 2 new characters who play big roles in this season and join the main crew. Robin, who is Steve's co-worker, as well as Alexei, a former Russian spy. Now that we have the characters out of the way, let's dive into the plot and see just what happened. With that said, this season takes place 1 year after the second season, and a lot has happened in that past year. Dustin went away for summer camp, and now he's back, and he has a girlfriend named Susie. And speaking of girlfriends, it seems that this season, Mike and 11 are now a couple, Lucas and Max are a couple, and Nancy and Jonathan are also a couple. So it's a lot of love happening in Hawkins. And the more dynamic and interesting of those relationships is between Mike and 11, because these 2 characters have had a bond since the first season. However, ever since 11 has been living with Hopper, and she is now in his care as his daughter, and he is the father figure to 11, having Mike around making out with 11 all the time kind of rubs Hopper the wrong way. Another thing with this season, and the character that takes a prominent role, is the character of Billy. This season starts off with an emphasis on Billy in the first episode. Besides the fact that Billy is a lifeguard at the local pool, we see that all the MILFs around town have the hots for Billy, as well as Mike's mom, because we saw that kind of brewing in the last season. But in this season, she seems overly into Billy and kind of not into her husband anymore. That dynamic with Billy and all these older women come to fruition later on, because Billy takes center stage in the story and he becomes the main focus. For example, towards the end of the first episode, we see that Billy was going to meet up with Mike's mom to go for a date, and he gets into an accident and he gets caught by the Mind Flayer. Now, the Mind Flayer is the name for the shadow creature of the second season, who now takes a more prominent role in this season as the antagonist, because in last season, the Mind Flayer was mainly stuck to Will, but this season it expanded its horizon and put its grasp onto Billy, who makes Billy the major antagonist of this season, as the Mind Flayer's plans to deal with 11 come through fruition via Billy. With Billy now being a major antagonist, we are also introduced to the secondary antagonist of this season, and that is the Russians. The Russians are the secondary antagonists because their role is they want to open the portal between our world and the Upside Down in order to weaponize the knowledge they learn and the ability to traverse through the 2 dimensions. Because remember, in the 80s, the Cold War was still raging on, and the US and the Russians were just trying to beat each other in an arms race at that point. So, of course, having access to an interdimensional gate that can transport you around the world is pretty important in the war efforts. And remember the fact that it can transport you around the world, because that plays key dividends to the ending as well as the end credit scenes of this season. And with the Russians being the secondary antagonist, they're attacked from 2 fronts, and one of the fronts are headed by Steve and Dustin, because in this season, Steve is now working in an ice cream parlor in the Starcourt Mall, which is the new mall that opened up in Hawkins. So Steve is now working there, and Dustin decides to go hang out with Steve to further their bromance, because at this point, Dustin came back from camp and everything's changed. Like I said, Lucas is dating Max, Mike is dating Elle, and Will is just being Will. So Dustin doesn't feel appreciated by his friends. He goes to Steve, and it continues blossoming their brotherly bromance friendship. And that's where we're introduced to the new character of Robin, who is Steve's co-worker and also someone who went to high school with him. And that's when Lucas's sister Erica takes a more prominent role this season. On top of that, Nancy and Jonathan are working at the local papers, and Nancy sees that there is something going on in town, and that's the influence of the Mind Flayer as he's amassing an army to join his side. With that all being said and all the separation happening, we break down into 3 different factions who are all dealing with different angles of this. We have Joyce and Hopper, who are together trying to figure out what the Russians want in town, while Mike, Elle, Nancy, and the crew are actually out there trying to stop the Mind Flayer who has possessed Billy. And then we have Dustin and Steve's crew inside the Starcourt Mall, who actually get involved with the Russians directly. Now, I want to take a minute to look at the Mind Flayer's plan, because the Mind Flayer we thought was defeated last season when Elle closed the gates. Because remember, when they exorcised the shadowed creature from Will's body last season, he never went to the gate. So when Elle closed it, he stayed on this side and it was dormant. But with the Russians trying to open up the portal, it opened up just enough of the upside down to have the Mind Flayer reintroduce itself into our world and try to destroy Elle. And in season 1, when the brain or the source of the Mind Flayer who lived on the other side of the portal, he attacked Hawkins using the Demogorgon. And the second season, he used the Demodogs as well as the Mind Flayer. But it was always 1 or 2 antagonists. This season, the Mind Flayer is using Billy to amass a big army to create the big shadow creature that we saw in Will's dream, because it'll take that type of power to kill Elle. And once she's out of the way, there's nothing to stop the Mind Flayer as well as his forces from escaping the upside down and taking over our side of the world. So his whole plan is to create a giant creature strong enough to overpower Elle. And for the most part, he does. And the only way to stop the Mind Flayer is the same way they stopped him the last 2 seasons, and that's to close the portal that links the 2 worlds. And that's when Alexei comes in. When Hopper and Joyce's investigation lead them to Alexei, and they grab Alexei and they bring him to Murray. Murray is able to speak Russian and translate just what's going on, and Alexei realizes that these guys are essentially the good guys. And now that's when our 3 teams converge at the Starcourt Mall, and together they try to stop the Russians as well as the Mind Flayer. And it's through their combined efforts that they work together, they stop the Mind Flayer, and they close the portal. But it comes at a great loss to the characters, because Hopper is killed in the process, Billy dies in the process, and then Joyce moves away with Will and Jonathan, breaking up the crew and leaving it wide open for season 4. What's great about this season and what's different from the previous seasons is the fact that this season takes a darker tone and sets our characters up to be tragic. For example, the character of Billy, who we all thought was just a jerk from the previous season, we come to find out that most of his problems stem from his relationship with his mother and his father. And his father was abusive to his mother and ran her off, and she left them with an abusive father. And at that point, his father remarried with Max's mother and brought Max into his life while treating Billy like a piece of garbage. The situation with Billy's mother is what causes him to lack that maternal love, and which causes him to lash out the way he did in the last 2 seasons. And we get a better understanding and a better look into Billy's psyche because of because of the circumstances with the Mind Slayer, which forces Eleven to look into his psyche. So Billy's character truly is one of the more tragic characters of this show, because we would have never gotten to peer inside of his damages and his psyche had he not been taken over by the Mind Flayer and end up doing way darker and egregious things than he's done before. So while he is the main antagonist and kind of a secondary antagonist in the second season, he's also a character who is a byproduct of his environment and the way he was raised. So is Billy truly a bad guy, or he's just a victim of circumstance? This show and this season really blurs that line. And not just with Billy, but also the character of Alexei, who at this point, all we knew from him in the beginning was that he was just a commie spy. But as the season went on, he just wanted to be an American and enjoy some of the things that we enjoyed. But again, is he another victim of circumstance? And then we have the growing relationship between Mike and Elle, and the fact that the way that relationship was portrayed, Mike was a little bit overbearing, and Eleven never got to actually explore what it's like to be a teenage girl until her and Max got together this season and explored that friendship even more. And then another thing that happened is we look deeper at the character of Steve, who back in high school, Steve used to be the man. Like the song goes, "Damn, homie, in high school you was the man, homie." Steve used to be the man, and now he's working at an ice cream parlor at the mall with someone who he considered a loser back in high school. But then all the girls around him used to fall for the hair and all his game and all his talk, but now he's a regular person. His glory days are behind him, and he has to come to accept that. And then we have our four main group of guys. These four characters are growing apart because they're growing older. They're getting girlfriends. They're not playing Dungeons and Dragons as much as they used to. And we see that they kind of separate at the end of the series. But all of this shows us why Stranger Things is such a great show, because it takes the dynamics of real life and different issues and it puts it to the forefront while also having great 80s nostalgia and the big overarching threat of the mind flayer in the background. But these stories and this show is mainly a human story, and the fact that the characters operate and still behave the way they behave despite the fact that the mind flayer is an ever-growing threat is something that I find phenomenal. And then you have the blossoming of the character of Nancy, you have Jonathan's character, and then you have the relationship between Joyce and Hopper, who we thought was going to grow into something more than it was. And then Hopper dies. He gets evaporated when they blow up the portal machine that the Russians created, and he ends up dying, and Joyce moves away with 11, Will, and Jonathan. But then at the very end, we get an end credit scene where the Russians in Russia have their own Demigorgon, but not just their own Demigorgon. During this end credit scene, we see them go to a cell, and one of the other Russians say, "Do not open that cell, let's leave the American." And then they grab a Russian prisoner, they toss him into a cave, and he is killed by a Demigorgon. I have reason to believe that this person that's inside of that cell is Hopper, because Hopper, we never saw him die technically. And if we go back to season 1, remember 11 was disintegrated, but then she came back. And we know that the Upside Down is essentially our world in another dimension, and wherever you move in the upper world, in our world, you also move in that direction in the Upside Down world. So you could theoretically leave Hawkins High School in the Upside Down world, walk through another portal in Russia, for example, because we know in this season Russia has a portal. It's just not as powerful and easy to breach as the portal is in Hawkins. But what if Hopper was able to find a way out through the Russian portal and he ends up in Russia? 11 survived getting disintegrated in the first season, and it was Hopper who found her, and she has a deep relationship and love with Hopper. So if she was able to remanifest herself, it could stand to reason that Hopper could do the same, or maybe if 11 willed it, because we see that at the end of the season, her powers aren't working, but her powers could have been drained because of all the strong emotions she fought for Hopper, and she remanifests Hopper. But because the Hawkins portal is now closed, he remanifests in the Russian portal, and he is the American that is actually in that prison cell. But hey, that's just my theory. I'd love to hear your guys' feedback on what you thought of this season, the theory of Hopper coming back, and furthermore, let me know in the comment section below anything that I missed or I didn't talk about that you guys would love for me to expand on. I'd love to hear that in the comment section below. And if you like this video, definitely give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button if you guys have not already. And until next time, binge on.